The room was silent, the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. The air was thick with tension, and every pair of eyes in the psychic sensitivity training class was locked on the newcomers. They were unlike anyone the class had ever seen, tall, muscular, with scars that told stories of survival in the harshest conditions. These were the Deathworlders, humans from a planet so deadly that most species avoided it entirely. The instructor, a slender psychic with glowing blue eyes, stepped forward. "Welcome to the psychic sensitivity training class," she said, her voice trembling slightly. We hope you find this experience enlightening." One of the Deathworlders, a man with a deep scar running down his cheek, nodded. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the delicate, nervous faces of the psychic students. He could feel their fear, their unease. It was nothing new to him. The class began with a simple exercise, connecting with the psychic energy in the room. The psychic students closed their eyes, their faces serene as they tapped into the energy around them. The Deathworlders, however, stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do. Then, it happened. One of the Deathworlders, a woman with fiery red hair, clenched her fists in frustration. Suddenly, the room shook violently. The psychic students gasped, their eyes wide with shock. The instructor stumbled back, her face pale. What was that?" one of the students whispered. The Deathworlders exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was clear: this class was going to be anything but ordinary. The room was still buzzing with tension after the unexpected psychic event caused by the red-haired Deathworlder. The psychic students whispered among themselves, casting nervous glances at the newcomers. The instructor, still shaken, tried to regain control of the class. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "Let's move on to our first practical exercise. This is a simple test to measure your ability to sense and manipulate psychic energy. Pair up and focus on creating a small energy orb between your hands." The psychic students quickly paired up, their movements graceful and practiced. The Deathworlders, however, stood awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. The scarred man, who seemed to be the leader of the group, stepped forward. "We don't know how to do this," he said bluntly. The instructor forced a smile. "That's all right. Just try to feel the energy around you. Close your eyes and focus." The Deathworlders exchanged skeptical looks but followed her instructions. They closed their eyes, their faces scrunched in concentration. The psychic students watched with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Minutes passed, and nothing happened. The psychic students began to snicker. "Maybe they're just not cut out for this," one of them whispered loudly. The red-haired Deathworlder's eyes snapped open, her face flushed with anger. "We're not here to be laughed at," she growled. The scarred man placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out." Just then, one of the younger Deathworlders, a lanky boy with a nervous demeanor, suddenly gasped. His hands began to glow faintly, and a small, flickering orb of energy formed between them. The room fell silent. The instructor's eyes widened. "Incredible," she murmured. You're actually doing it." The boy looked up, his face a mix of shock and pride. I think I felt something," he said hesitantly. The psychic students stared in disbelief. The scarred man grinned. "Looks like we're not as hopeless as you thought," he said, his voice laced with satisfaction. But the moment was short-lived. The energy orb in the boy's hands suddenly flared, growing brighter and brighter until it exploded in a burst of light. The boy was thrown backward, landing hard on the floor. The room erupted into chaos. The psychic student screamed, diving for cover. The instructor rushed to the boy's side, her hands glowing as she checked for injuries. "Are you all right?" she asked urgently. The boy groaned, sitting up slowly. I I think so, he said, his voice shaky. The scarred man helped him to his feet, his expression grim. What just happened? He demanded. The instructor hesitated. It seems, your psychic energy is different from ours. It's raw, untamed. We'll need to be careful moving forward. The Deathworlders exchanged uneasy glances. They had come here to learn, but now it seemed they were more dangerous than they realized. As the class ended, the psychic students gave the Deathworlders a wide berth, their earlier amusement replaced with fear. The scarred man clenched his fists, his jaw tight. We're not here to hurt anyone, he muttered under his breath. But if they keep treating us like monsters, they might just turn us into ones. The red-haired Deathworlder nodded in agreement. We'll show them what we're capable of, she said fiercely. And they'll regret underestimating us. The next day, the atmosphere in the psychic sensitivity training class was tense. The psychic students kept their distance from the Deathworlders, their earlier curiosity replaced with wariness. The instructors, too, seemed unsure of how to handle the newcomers. But the Deathworlders were determined to prove themselves. The scarred man, whose name was revealed to be Yarrick, stood at the front of the group, his arms crossed and his expression resolute. We're not here to cause trouble, he said, addressing the class. But we're not going to be pushed around either. We'll learn, just like the rest of you. The instructor nodded, though her eyes still held a hint of caution. Today's exercise is a simulation, she explained. You'll be placed in a controlled environment where you'll need to use your psychic abilities to solve a series of challenges. This is a team exercise, so you'll need to work together. The psychic students quickly formed their usual groups, leaving the Deathworlders to pair up among themselves. Yarrick, the red-haired woman named Kira, the lanky boy named Eli, and two others, a quiet, observant man named Tarek and a fierce, muscular woman named Rhina, stood together, their expressions determined. The simulation began. The room transformed into a dense, alien forest, with towering trees and strange, glowing plants. The air was thick with an eerie energy, and the psychic students immediately began using their abilities to navigate the environment. The Deathworlders, however, were at a disadvantage. Without the ability to sense psychic energy like the others, they relied on their instincts and physical strength. Yarrick led the way, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. Stay close, he said, his voice low. We don't know what's out here. As they moved deeper into the forest, they encountered their first challenge, a massive, vine-covered wall blocking their path. The psychic students used their abilities to levitate over it, but the Deathworlders had to find another way. Kira stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. Stand back, she said, cracking her knuckles. With a powerful punch, she shattered the vines, creating an opening for the group. The psychic students watched in awe as the Deathworlders effortlessly cleared the obstacle. Maybe they're not so useless after all, one of the psychic students muttered. The challenges grew more difficult as they progressed. At one point, the group was confronted by a swarm of aggressive, insect-like creatures. The psychic students panicked, their abilities faltering under the pressure. But the Deathworlders didn't hesitate. Yarrick and Rhina charged forward, their movements swift and precise. Kira used her strength to crush the creatures, while Tarek and Eli provided support. Within minutes, the swarm was defeated. The psychic students stared in stunned silence. How did you do that? One of them asked. Yarrick shrugged. We've survived worse, he said simply. As the simulation continued, the Deathworlders' unique abilities became increasingly apparent. Their strength, resilience, and quick thinking saved the group from multiple disasters. By the time the exercise ended, even the most skeptical psychic students had to admit that the Deathworlders were an asset. But not everyone was impressed. As the class dispersed, a tall, arrogant psychic student named Valen approached Yarrick. You think you're special, don't you? He sneered. Just because you can punch things doesn't mean you belong here. Yarrick met his gaze evenly. We're not here to prove anything to you, he said. We're here to learn. And if you have a problem with that, that's your issue. Valen's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. As he walked away, Kira stepped up beside him. Maybe you should stick to lifting rocks on your little death world, he taunted, glancing at Yarrick. Yarrick ignored him, focusing on the small metal ball in front of him. He could feel something, a faint pull, like a thread tugging at his mind. He concentrated harder, his brow furrowed in effort. Suddenly, the ball lifted off the table, hovering in the air. The class fell silent, all eyes on Yarrick. Valen's smirk faded. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Looks like the brute has some talent after all. Before Yarrick could respond, Valen flicked his wrist, sending a surge of psychic energy toward the ball. It shot across the room, narrowly missing Eli's head and smashing into the wall. The room erupted into chaos. Kira lunged at Valen, her fists clenched, but Yarrick grabbed her arm, holding her back. Not worth it, he said firmly. Valen smirked. What's the matter? Can't handle a little competition? The instructor stepped in, her face stern. Enough, she barked. This is a training class, not a battlefield. Valen, apologize. Valen rolled his eyes. Fine. Sorry, he said, though his tone was anything but sincere. The rest of the class passed in tense silence. When it was over, the Deathworlders gathered in a corner of the room, their frustration palpable. We can't keep letting him get away with this, Kira said, her voice low and angry. Yarrick sighed. I know. But if we retaliate, we'll just prove his point. We need to be smarter than that. Tarek, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What if we beat him at his own game? The others turned to him, curious. What do you mean? Eli asked. Tarek's eyes gleamed with a rare spark of determination. We may not have their psychic abilities, but we have something they don't, our instincts. If we can use that to our advantage, we might be able to outsmart him. The group exchanged thoughtful glances. It was a risky plan, but it was better than doing nothing. Over the next few days, the Deathworlders began to observe Valen closely, studying his behavior and looking for weaknesses. They noticed that he relied heavily on his psychic abilities, often neglecting his physical training. He was also overconfident, a flaw they could exploit. The opportunity to put their plan into action came during a team exercise. The class was divided into groups, and by sheer luck, or perhaps the instructor's design, the Deathworlders were paired against Valen and his friends. The exercise was a race through a simulated obstacle course, with each team required to use their abilities to overcome challenges. Valen's team took an early lead, their psychic abilities giving them an advantage. But the Deathworlders didn't give up. They used their strength and teamwork to navigate the course, finding creative solutions to each obstacle. When they reached the final challenge, a narrow bridge suspended over a deep chasm, they saw their chance. Valen's team was already halfway across the bridge, their confidence evident. But as they approached the center, the bridge began to shake. What's happening? One of Valen's teammates cried, their voice panicked. The Deathworlders, watching from the sidelines, exchanged knowing glances. Tarek had used his keen observational skills to identify a weak point in the bridge's structure, and Kira had used her strength to destabilize it. Valen's team scrambled to reach the other side, but it was too late. The bridge collapsed, sending them plummeting into the chasm. The simulation ended abruptly, and the class erupted into cheers and laughter. Valen's face was red with anger as he stormed over to the Deathworlders. You cheated, he accused. Yarrick crossed his arms, his expression calm. We used our strengths. Just like you use yours. The instructor stepped in, her face unreadable. The exercise is over, she said. And the Deathworlders have proven that there's more than one way to succeed. Valen glared at Yarok, his fists clenched. This isn't over, he muttered before storming away. The Deathworlders exchanged satisfied smiles. They had won this round, but they knew the rivalry was far from over. The victory over Valen's team was a turning point for the Deathworlders. For the first time, the psychic students began to see them as equals rather than outsiders. But the newfound respect came with a price. Valen's hostility only grew, and he became more determined than ever to prove that the Deathworlders didn't belong. Meanwhile, the instructors were growing increasingly curious about the Deathworlders' unique abilities. The incident during the simulation, where Eli had accidentally unleashed a burst of raw psychic energy, had sparked their interest. They began to conduct tests, trying to understand the source of the Deathworlders' power. One evening, after class, the Deathworlders were summoned to a private meeting with the head instructor, a tall, imposing figure named Master Kale. His piercing blue eyes studied them as they entered the room, his expression unreadable. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a row of chairs. The Deathworlders obeyed, their nerves on edge. Yarok sat at the front of the group, his posture straight and his gaze steady. "We've been observing you," Master Kale began, his voice calm but authoritative. "And we've noticed something unusual. Your psychic energy is different. It's raw, untamed, and incredibly powerful. We believe it's a result of your environment, your death world." The Deathworlders exchanged uneasy glances. Kira leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" she asked. Master Kale folded his hands on the table. "We believe that the harsh conditions of your planet have forced you to develop a unique form of psychic energy. It's not like ours, which is refined and controlled. Yours is wild, instinctive, and tied to your survival instincts." Eli's eyes widened. "Is that why I, exploded that one time?" Master Kale nodded. "Precisely. Your abilities are tied to your emotions and instincts. When you feel threatened or stressed, your psychic energy reacts accordingly." Yarok frowned. "So what does that mean for us? Are we too dangerous to be here?" Master Kale hesitated. "That's what we're trying to determine. Your abilities are unlike anything we've ever seen. If harnessed correctly, they could be incredibly valuable. But if left unchecked, they could also be dangerous." The room fell silent as the Deathworlders processed his words. Tarek, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What do you suggest we do?" Master Kale leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "We'd like to conduct further tests to better understand your abilities. If we can find a way to help you control them, you could become some of the most powerful psychics we've ever trained." The Deathworlders exchanged uncertain glances. The idea of being experimented on didn't sit well with them, but they also knew this could be their chance to prove themselves. Yarok finally broke the silence. "We'll do it," he said firmly. "But on one condition: we're not lab rats. We're here to learn, and we want to be treated with respect." Master Kale nodded. "Agreed. This is a partnership, not an experiment." Over the next few days, the Deathworlders underwent a series of tests. The instructors monitored their psychic energy, trying to understand how it worked. They discovered that the Deathworlders' abilities were indeed tied to their emotions and instincts. When they felt threatened or angry, their psychic energy surged, often with explosive results. But they also discovered something else, something that surprised even the instructors. The Deathworlders' psychic energy wasn't just raw and untamed, it was also incredibly resilient. Unlike the psychic students, who relied on precise control, the Deathworlders' energy was adaptable, able to withstand extreme conditions and recover quickly. During one test, the instructors simulated a high-stress environment, similar to the conditions of a death world. The psychic students struggled to maintain their focus, their abilities faltering under the pressure. But the Deathworlders thrived. Their instincts kicked in, and their psychic energy surged, allowing them to overcome the challenges with ease. The instructors were amazed. "This changes everything," one of them murmured. "If we can harness this resilience, it could revolutionize psychic training." But not everyone was impressed. Valen, who had been watching the tests from the sidelines, grew increasingly bitter. He saw the Deathworlders' success as a threat to his own status as the top student. One evening, as the Deathworlders were leaving the training hall, Valen confronted them. "You think you're special, don't you?" he sneered. "Just because the instructors are fascinated by your little tricks doesn't mean you belong here." Yarrick stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "We're not here to compete with you, Valen. We're here to learn. And if you can't handle that, that's your problem." Valen's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Kira stepped up beside Yarrick. "You're just scared," she said, her voice cold. "Scared that we might actually be better than you." Valen's face turned red with anger, but he said nothing. He turned on his heel and stormed away, his fists clenched. As the Deathworlders walked back to their quarters, Eli glanced at Yarrick. "Do you think he'll try something?" Yarrick sighed. "Probably. But we'll be ready." The revelation of their unique abilities had given the Deathworlders a new sense of purpose. But it had also made them a target. The challenges ahead would test not only their abilities but also their unity. The instructor's fascination with the Deathworlders' unique abilities led to a bold proposal, a controlled experiment to test the limits of their psychic energy. The goal was to see if their raw, instinctive power could be harnessed and refined, potentially unlocking new possibilities for psychic training. The Deathworlders were hesitant. The idea of being pushed to their limits in a controlled environment didn't sit well with them, especially after the incident with Eli's energy orb. But Master Kale assured them that every precaution would be taken to ensure their safety. "This is an opportunity to understand your abilities better," he said. "And to prove to everyone, including yourselves, that you belong here." After much discussion, the Deathworlders agreed. They knew the risks, but they also knew this was their chance to show what they were truly capable of. The experiment took place in a specially designed chamber, a large, circular room with walls that could simulate various environments. The instructors monitored the experiment from a control room, their eyes fixed on the screens as they prepared to begin. Yarrick, Kira, Eli, Tarek, and Rhina stood in the center of the chamber, their expressions a mix of determination and apprehension. Master Kale's voice echoed through the room. "The simulation will gradually increase in intensity," he explained. "Your goal is to use your abilities to adapt and overcome the challenges. Remember, your instincts are your greatest strength." The simulation began. The chamber transformed into a dense, alien jungle, with towering trees and strange, glowing plants. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of unseen creatures echoed in the distance. The Deathworlders moved cautiously, their senses on high alert. Yarrick took the lead, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. "We don't know what's out here." As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the challenges began. The first was a massive, vine-covered wall blocking their path. The psychic students in the control room watched intently, curious to see how the Deathworlders would handle it. Kira stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Stand back," she said, cracking her knuckles. With a powerful punch, she shattered the vines, creating an opening for the group. The instructors exchanged impressed glances. "Incredible," one of them murmured. "Their physical strength is unmatched." The challenges grew more difficult as they progressed. At one point, the group was confronted by a swarm of aggressive, insect-like creatures. The psychic students in the control room held their breath, wondering how the Deathworlders would react. But the Deathworlders didn't hesitate. Yarrick and Rhina charged forward, their movements swift and precise. Kira used her strength to crush the creatures, while Tarek and Eli provided support. Within minutes, the swarm was defeated. The instructors were amazed. "Their coordination is flawless," Master Kale said, his voice filled with admiration. But the experiment wasn't over. The simulation shifted again, this time to a barren, rocky landscape with a raging storm overhead. Lightning crackled across the sky, and the ground shook with the force of the wind. The Deathworlders huddled together, their instincts kicking in. Eli's hands began to glow faintly, and a small, flickering orb of energy formed between them. I think I can do something," he said hesitantly. Yarrick nodded. "Go for it." Eli closed his eyes, focusing on the energy in his hands. The orb grew brighter, and suddenly, a shield of energy formed around the group, protecting them from the storm. The instructors watched in awe. "He's creating a psychic barrier," one of them said. "Without any formal training." The simulation continued, pushing the Deathworlders to their limits. But they didn't falter. Their instincts guided them, and their unique abilities allowed them to overcome every challenge. Finally, the simulation ended. The chamber returned to its normal state, and the Deathworlders stood in the center, breathing heavily but triumphant. Master Kale entered the chamber, his expression filled with pride. "You've done it," he said. "You've proven that your abilities are not only powerful but also adaptable. This changes everything." The Deathworlders exchanged relieved smiles. They had faced their fears and come out stronger. But as they left the chamber, they couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. Valen was waiting for them outside, his expression dark. "Congratulations," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've proven that you're just as dangerous as we thought." Yarrick met his gaze evenly. "We're not dangerous," he said. "We're survivors. And if you can't handle that, that's your problem." Valen's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He turned on his heel and walked away, his fists clenched. The Deathworlders knew that their success had made them a target. But they also knew that they had the strength and resilience to face whatever came next. The success of the experiment had a profound impact on the psychic sensitivity training class. The Deathworlders were no longer seen as outsiders, they were now respected, and in some cases, feared, for their unique abilities. But with that respect came new challenges. Valen's resentment had reached a boiling point. He saw the Deathworlders rise as a direct threat to his own status, and he was determined to put them in their place. His hostility became more overt, and he began to rally other students to his cause, spreading rumors and sowing discord. The Deathworlders tried to ignore him, focusing on their training and the progress they were making. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to avoid confrontation. One evening, as the Deathworlders were returning to their quarters after a long day of training, they found their room in disarray. Their belongings had been tossed around, and the walls were covered in harsh, scrawled messages. "Go back to your death world. You don't belong here. Monsters." Kira's fists clenched as she read the messages. "That's it," she growled. "I'm going to find Valen and—" Yarrick grabbed her arm, stopping her mid-sentence. "No," he said firmly. "That's what he wants. If we retaliate, we'll just prove his point." Tarek, who had been quietly surveying the damage, spoke up. "He's trying to provoke us. But we don't have to play his game." Eli, who had been unusually quiet, looked up with a determined expression. "We need to expose him. Show everyone what he's really like." The group exchanged thoughtful glances. It was a risky plan, but it was better than doing nothing. Over the next few days, the Deathworlders began to gather evidence of Valen's sabotage. They documented every incident, every rumor, and every act of hostility. They also reached out to other students, many of whom had grown tired of Valen's arrogance and were willing to speak out. The turning point came during a class exercise. The students were divided into teams and tasked with navigating a complex maze using their psychic abilities. Valen, as usual, was leading his team with confidence, but the Deathworlders noticed something unusual. He was using his abilities to sabotage other teams, creating obstacles and causing chaos. Yarrick and the others watched carefully, documenting everything. When the exercise ended, they approached the instructors with their evidence. Valen has been sabotaging other students, Yarrick said, presenting the recordings and testimonies. He's been spreading rumors, destroying property, and undermining the class. We can't let this continue. The instructors reviewed the evidence, their expressions growing increasingly grim. Master Kale finally spoke. This is a serious accusation. But if what you're saying is true, we'll have no choice but to take action. Valen was summoned to a private meeting with the instructors. The Deathworlders waited outside, their nerves on edge. When Valen emerged, his face was pale, and his usual arrogance was gone. He glanced at the Deathworlders, his eyes filled with anger and shame, before storming away. The instructors later announced that Valen had been suspended pending further investigation. The class was stunned, but many students felt a sense of relief. The Deathworlders, however, knew that this wasn't the end. Valen's suspension had only deepened the divide, and there were still those who saw them as a threat. As they returned to their quarters that evening, Yarrick spoke up. "We've won this round," he said. "But we need to stay vigilant. Valen's not the only one who doesn't want us here." Kira nodded. "We've come too far to back down now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The Deathworlders had proven their strength and resilience, but the challenges ahead would test not only their abilities but also their unity. Valen's suspension sent shockwaves through the psychic sensitivity training class. While some students felt relief, others were uneasy, unsure of what the future held. The Deathworlders, however, knew that the battle was far from over. Valen's allies were still out there, and their resentment had only grown stronger. A few days after Valen's suspension, the class was informed of a special training exercise, a simulated mission that would test their abilities to the limit. The goal was to retrieve a valuable artifact from a dangerous, enemy-controlled zone. The students would be divided into teams, and the winning team would earn recognition and a special reward. The Deathworlders were paired together, as usual, but they noticed that the other teams seemed unusually hostile. Whispers and glares followed them wherever they went, and it was clear that Valen's absence had only fueled the tension. "Stay focused," Yarrick said as they prepared for the mission. "This isn't just a training exercise. It's a test of our unity." The simulation began. The students were transported to a war-torn city, with crumbling buildings and smoke-filled streets. The artifact was located in a heavily guarded tower at the center of the city, and the teams had to navigate through enemy patrols and traps to reach it. The Deathworlders moved cautiously, their instincts guiding them. Yarrick led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for danger. Kira and Rhina flanked the group, ready to defend against any threats. Tarek and Eli brought up the rear, their senses on high alert. As they approached the tower, they encountered their first challenge, a group of enemy drones patrolling the area. The other teams hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, but the Deathworlders didn't falter. "We need to take them out quietly," Yarrick whispered. "Kira, Rhina, distract them. Tarek, Eli, disable their systems." The plan worked perfectly. Kira and Rhina created a diversion, drawing the drones away, while Tarek and Eli used their limited psychic abilities to disrupt the drones' programming. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized. The other teams watched in awe, but their admiration quickly turned to resentment. "They think they're so special," one of Valen's allies muttered. The Deathworlders ignored the comments and pressed on. They reached the tower and began their ascent, using their strength and teamwork to overcome the obstacles. But as they neared the top, they were ambushed. A group of students, led by one of Valen's closest allies, blocked their path. "You're not getting past us," the leader sneered. "This is our chance to prove that we don't need you." Yarrick stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. "We're not here to fight you," he said. "But if you stand in our way, we'll do what we have to do." The confrontation escalated quickly. The other students used their psychic abilities to attack, creating barriers and launching energy blasts. The Deathworlders, however, relied on their instincts and physical strength. Yarrick and Kira charged forward, breaking through the barriers, while Rhina provided cover. Tarek and Eli used their unique abilities to disrupt the attackers' focus. The battle was intense, but the Deathworlders' resilience gave them the upper hand. One by one, the attackers were forced to retreat, their confidence shattered. Finally, the Deathworlders reached the top of the tower, where the artifact was located. But as they approached it, they were confronted by one final challenge, a powerful psychic barrier that seemed impossible to breach. Eli stepped forward, his hands glowing faintly. "I think I can do this," he said, his voice filled with determination. He closed his eyes, focusing on the energy in his hands. The glow grew brighter, and suddenly, the barrier began to weaken. With a final surge of energy, Eli shattered the barrier, allowing the group to retrieve the artifact. The simulation ended, and the Deathworlders emerged victorious. The instructors were impressed, but the other students were silent, their expressions a mix of awe and resentment. As the class dispersed, Yarrick and the others knew that their victory had come at a cost. They had proven their strength and resilience, but they had also made enemies. That evening, as they gathered in their quarters, Yarrick spoke up. "We've come a long way," he said. "But this isn't the end. We need to stay united, no matter what." Kira nodded. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The Deathworlders had proven themselves, but the challenges ahead would test not only their abilities but also their unity. The Deathworlders' victory in the simulated mission marked a turning point for the psychic sensitivity training class. While some students began to see them in a new light, others remained bitter, unable to accept that the outsiders had surpassed them. The tension in the class was palpable, but the Deathworlders remained focused on their goal, to learn, grow, and prove that they belonged. As the weeks passed, the Deathworlders continued to excel in their training. Their unique abilities, once seen as a liability, were now recognized as a valuable asset. The instructors worked closely with them, helping them refine their skills and harness their raw psychic energy. But the real test came during the final exercise, a graduation challenge that would determine their future in the program. The challenge was simple in concept but incredibly difficult in execution. Each student had to navigate a complex, ever-changing maze while using their psychic abilities to overcome obstacles and reach the center. The Deathworlders knew that this was their chance to prove themselves once and for all. They also knew that the other students would be watching closely, waiting for them to fail. On the day of the challenge, the class gathered in the training hall, their nerves on edge. Master Kale addressed the group, his voice calm but authoritative. "This is your final test," he said. "It will push you to your limits, but it will also show you what you're truly capable of. Remember, the maze is not just a physical challenge, it's a test of your mind, your instincts, and your will to succeed." The challenge began. The students entered the maze one by one, their expressions determined. The Deathworlders waited their turn, their hearts pounding with anticipation. When it was their turn, they stepped into the maze together, their unity giving them strength. The walls of the maze shifted and changed, creating new paths and obstacles with each step. The other students struggled to adapt, their psychic abilities faltering under the pressure. But the Deathworlders thrived. Their instincts guided them, and their unique abilities allowed them to overcome every challenge. Yarrick led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for danger. Kira and Rhina provided support, using their strength to clear obstacles. Tarek and Eli used their psychic energy to navigate the maze's twists and turns. As they neared the center of the maze, they encountered one final challenge, a massive, energy-based barrier that seemed impossible to breach. The other students had been stopped by this barrier, their abilities insufficient to overcome it. But the Deathworlders didn't give up. They gathered together, their combined energy creating a powerful force. Eli closed his eyes, focusing on the energy in his hands. The glow grew brighter, and suddenly, the barrier began to weaken. With a final surge of energy, the Deathworlders shattered the barrier, allowing them to reach the center of the maze. The instructors watched in awe as they emerged victorious, their unity and resilience shining through. The class erupted into applause, but the Deathworlders knew that their victory was about more than just the challenge. It was a testament to their strength, their determination, and their ability to overcome adversity. As they stood in the center of the maze, Master Kale approached them, his expression filled with pride. "You've proven yourselves," he said. "Not just as students, but as individuals. Your journey has been difficult, but it has also shown you the power of unity and resilience." Yarrick nodded, his voice filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without each other. And we couldn't have done it without the support of those who believed in us." The Deathworlders' success had a profound impact on the class. The other students, inspired by their journey, began to see them in a new light. Even Valen, who had returned from his suspension, approached them with a newfound respect. "I was wrong about you," he admitted, his voice filled with humility. "You've proven that strength comes in many forms. And I have a lot to learn." The Deathworlders accepted his apology, knowing that forgiveness was the first step toward unity. As the class graduated and prepared to move on to the next chapter of their lives, the Deathworlders reflected on their journey. They had faced countless challenges, but they had also discovered the power of resilience, unity, and the importance of embracing differences. In the end, their story was not just about survival, it was about finding strength in adversity, building bridges where there were once walls, and proving that even the most unlikely individuals can achieve greatness. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their journey was far from over.